Hollywood, in the late 1970s, was a place of dreams and nightmares. The glitz of the silver screen mingled with the grit of the streets, where struggling actors, musicians, and artists sought fame. Among them was Jane King, a young woman who had left her quiet Midwestern life behind in pursuit of stardom. At 23, Jane had the classic Hollywood look: blonde hair, blue eyes, and a captivating smile. But what set her apart was her fierce determination and a rebellious streak that drew her to the emerging punk scene. The punk movement in Los Angeles was raw, chaotic, and brimming with energy. Bands like X, The Germs, and Black Flag were tearing up the Sunset Strip, offering a soundtrack to a generation disillusioned with the status quo. Jane, a fan of the scene, found herself drawn to the music, the fashion, and the attitude. She quickly became a fixture at punk shows, rubbing shoulders with musicians, artists, and others on the fringes of society. She wasn't just a spectator. Jane wanted to be a part of this revolution. Jane's first step into the scene was through modeling. Her punk-inspired photos caught the eye of underground magazines, and soon she was known among the in-crowd. But Jane's ambitions went beyond modeling. She wanted to act, to sing, to be a star. The punk scene was a perfect fit for her, a place where she could express herself freely and rebel against the expectations that had been placed on her all her life. But beneath the surface, Jane's life was not as glamorous as it seemed. Like many who came to Hollywood, she struggled to make ends meet. She worked odd jobs, lived in a rundown apartment, and often found herself surrounded by questionable characters. The punk scene, while liberating, was also filled with danger, drugs, violence, and people who were lost in their own worlds of despair. And as Jane would soon discover, this world was about to collide with something far darker and more sinister. While Jane was making a name for herself in the punk scene, a different kind of fame was taking shape in Los Angeles, one of terror and brutality. The city had always had its share of crime, but in the late 1970s, it seemed like a darkness was enveloping the city. A string of brutal murders had left the city on edge, and the LAPD was struggling to catch the killer responsible. The media dubbed him the Hollywood Butcher because of the gruesome nature of his crimes. The victims were all young women, found in various parts of the city, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. The killings were random, the victims seemingly unrelated, and the killer left no clues. The city was gripped by fear, and women were warned not to walk alone at night. But for Jane and others in the punk scene, life went on. They were a generation that thrived on chaos, and danger was just another part of the allure. Unbeknownst to Jane, her world was about to be shattered. In the summer of 1979, she met a man who seemed to embody everything she loved about the punk scene. He was rebellious, mysterious, and had an edge that drew her in. His name was Sam, and he quickly became a fixture in Jane's life. He was older, with a dark charisma that made him stand out. Sam wasn't just part of the punk scene, he was one of its most notorious figures, known for his violent outbursts and connections to the criminal underworld. But Jane didn't see the warning signs. She was infatuated with Sam, and he introduced her to a world she had never known before. He took her to underground clubs where drugs flowed freely and the music was deafening. He introduced her to people who lived on the edge, who had no regard for the law or societal norms. Jane was captivated, and she found herself falling deeper into this dark world. As Jane's relationship with Sam intensified, so did the murders. The Hollywood Butcher was becoming more brazen, and the city was in a state of panic. The LAPD was under immense pressure to catch the killer, but they had no leads. The killing seemed random, and the victims had no connections to each other, or so it seemed. But then, a breakthrough came. One of the victims, a young woman named Lisa, had been seen with a man shortly before her death. Witnesses described him as tall, with dark hair and a menacing presence. The description matched Sam, and the police began to close in on him. Jane had no idea that the man she was falling for was the prime suspect in one of the most notorious murder sprees in Los Angeles history. She was blinded by her infatuation, by the excitement of being with someone who seemed so dangerous and unpredictable. But as the police closed in on Sam, the cracks in his facade began to show. One night, after a particularly wild party, Jane returned to her apartment with Sam. He was agitated, more so than usual, and Jane could sense that something was wrong. She tried to comfort him, but he pushed her away. As the night went on, Sam's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started talking about the murders, about how the city was in chaos, and how he was untouchable. Jane was horrified. She had never heard him talk like this before, and she began to realize that the man she was with was not who she thought he was. Fear began to creep in, but it was too late. She was in too deep. The next morning, Jane woke up to find Sam gone. Panicked, she called his friends, but no one had seen him. As the day went on, she became more and more anxious. She turned on the news and saw that another body had been found, this time just a few blocks from her apartment. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Sam was the Hollywood butcher. Terrified, Jane didn't know what to do. She was afraid to go to the police, fearing that they would think she was involved. She felt trapped, knowing that the man she had been involved with was a monster. But she also knew that she had to do something. She couldn't let him continue to kill. In a desperate attempt to gather evidence, Jane began searching through Sam's belongings. What she found shocked her to her core: photos of the victims, their personal belongings, and even bloody clothing. It was undeniable proof that Sam was the killer. With the evidence in hand, Jane knew she had to go to the police. But before she could, Sam returned. He was furious, having realized that Jane had discovered the truth. A violent confrontation ensued, with Sam threatening to kill her if she went to the authorities. Jane managed to escape, but not before being brutally beaten. Bleeding and terrified, Jane made her way to the nearest police station. She handed over the evidence and told them everything she knew. The police immediately launched a manhunt for Sam, but he was nowhere to be found. For days, the city was on high alert. The media was in a frenzy, and the punk scene was in shock. How could someone they knew, someone they had partied with, be capable of such horrors? Jane was left to grapple with the guilt and trauma of having been so close to a killer. Finally, after a week on the run, Sam was found hiding in an abandoned warehouse. He was arrested without incident and quickly confessed to the murders. The trial was a media circus, with Jane being thrust into the spotlight as a key witness. She testified against Sam, reliving the horrors of their relationship in front of the world. Sam was convicted and sentenced to death, but the damage had been done. Jane's life would never be the same. She left Los Angeles, trying to escape the memories of what had happened. But the scars remained, both physical and emotional. The punk scene in Los Angeles was forever changed by the events of that summer. The carefree rebellion that had defined it was replaced by a sense of loss and betrayal. People became more guarded, more suspicious. The Hollywood butcher had not just taken the lives of his victims, he had shattered the illusion of safety that had existed within the scene. As for Jane, she struggled to rebuild her life. She moved back to the Midwest, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. But the trauma of what she had experienced haunted her. She became a recluse, unable to trust anyone, constantly looking over her shoulder. The fame she had once sought was now a nightmare, as people continued to recognize her from the trial. Over time, Jane became a symbol of survival, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most vibrant and exciting scenes. But for Jane, the cost of that survival was too high. She had lost everything: her dreams, her innocence, and her sense of safety. In the years that followed, Jane tried to tell her story, hoping that it would help others avoid the same fate. She wrote a memoir, gave interviews, and spoke out about the dangers of falling for the wrong person. But no matter how much she tried to move on, the shadow of the Hollywood butcher loomed over her. In the end, Jane King became a tragic figure, a woman who had sought fame and found horror instead. Her story serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the brightest lights of Hollywood. And as the years passed, the legend of the Hollywood butcher became just another part of the city's dark history, a tale of terror and tragedy that continues to haunt those who lived through it. But for those who knew Jane, the pain was all too real. She was more than just a victim. She was a person who had dreams, who had loved, who had fought to survive, and in the end, she paid the ultimate price for that survival. After Sam was arrested, the truth about his horrifying crimes quickly came to light. His confession shocked the public, as he detailed the brutal murders he had committed during his reign of terror. The media labeled him as the Hollywood Butcher, and his trial became one of the most infamous in Los Angeles history. Sam's demeanor in court was cold and unremorseful. He showed no signs of guilt as he recounted the grisly details of his crimes. Jane's testimony against him was crucial, providing the jury with a first-hand account of the monster he had become behind closed doors. The evidence against Sam was overwhelming. Photos of the victims, their belongings, and the bloody clothing Jane had discovered. The prosecution built a strong case, and the jury took little time to find him guilty of multiple counts of murder. Sam was sentenced to death, a punishment fitting the horrors he had inflicted on his victims and the city. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he awaited execution on death row. However, like many death row inmates, his execution was delayed by years of appeals and legal battles. While in prison, Sam remained a menacing figure, unrepentant for his crimes. He became a notorious inmate, his name forever associated with one of Los Angeles' darkest chapters. The media continued to follow his case, but as time passed, the public's interest waned. Sam's story became just another dark tale in the annals of crime history. Years later, Sam died in prison, not by execution, but due to natural causes. His death brought a final end to the story of the Hollywood Butcher, but the pain and trauma he caused lived on in the hearts of those who had been affected by his actions. For Jane and the others who survived the ordeal, Sam's death was a small comfort. Though he was gone, the scars he left behind would never fully heal.